We come on the air today with the breaking news that FBI Director Christopher Wray has today announced his resignation. Wray made that announcement at an all-hands meeting a few hours ago, saying he will leave when the Biden administration comes to an end, and saying this, quote, "After weeks of careful thought, I've decided the right thing for the Bureau is for me to serve until the end of the current administration in January and then step down. My goal is to keep the focus on our mission, the indispensable work you're doing on behalf of the American people every day. In my view, this is the best way to avoid dragging the Bureau deeper into the fray while reinforcing the values and principles that are so important to how we do our work. It remains to be seen whether the FBI can even attempt to avoid being dragged deeper into the fray, as Wray seems to be suggesting, or whether his resignation simply plunges it deeper into uncertainty and leaves the workforce without its leader. Wray had 3 years left on a 10-year term. It's a 10-year term that is put in place to ensure departures don't line up with the end of a current administration. It's to ensure the independence of the FBI from all partisan politics. He was, though, appointed by Donald Trump, who initially approved of him quite a bit. Here's what he said about Wray in 2018.
I think Christopher Wray is very different from Comey, which is what you need. You need different. You need like the opposite. And he's moving step by step. And you're going to see a whole new, very proud FBI. I think that the Justice Department will end up being great. It's all going to happen. It's all going to work out. But I tried to stay as much uninvolved as I can.
It wasn't true at the time and certainly isn't now. But back to Wray. What changed? New York Times report says, quote, "It was the Bureau's scrutiny of Trump that almost certainly cut short Wray's tenure." Here's what he told our colleague Kristen Welker this past Sunday.
I can't say I'm thrilled with him. He invaded my home. I'm suing the country over it. He invaded Mar-a-Lago. What I'm going to say is I certainly cannot be happy with him.
The facts are this. The FBI conducted a court-ordered search of Mar-a-Lago after months of wrangling in which the National Archives and the Department of Justice repeatedly tried to get back sensitive national security documents and secrets from Donald Trump. But it was the facts, as they were revealed by the work of the FBI, that so enraged Donald Trump that he has now appointed a loyalist, a man named Kash Patel, to run the FBI. Patel's road to confirmation is lined with red flags being waved by his former Trump administration colleagues, including a dire public warning from former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton. He writes this in today's Wall Street Journal, quote, "Too many of Trump's personnel selections evidence his assiduous search for personal fealty, not loyalty to the Constitution. Kash Patel's nomination as director of the FBI squarely fits this pattern. To resolve questions over his integrity and fitness, a full-field FBI investigation, as prior nominees have undergone, is warranted. With more facts available and less rhetoric, the result will be clear. I regret I didn't fully discern Mr. Patel's threat immediately, but we are all now fairly warned. Senators won't escape history's judgment if they vote to confirm him," end quote. That breaking news about Chris Wray is where we start today with some of our favorite experts and friends. Former CIA director and MSNBC senior national security analyst John Brennan's here. Also joining us, Assistant Director for Counterintelligence at the FBI, MSNBC senior national security analyst Frank Figliuzzi's here. And former acting Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the Justice Department, MSNBC legal analyst Mary McCord is here. Also joining us, former chairman of the RNC, now co-host of MSNBC's The Weekend, Michael Steele is here. Director Brennan, I start with you. Leaving at the end of a current president's term is the opposite of what the 10-year service window is about. And we've covered the cross pressures on the FBI, but I wonder what it is like for the workforce to see their leader leave.
I think it's going to be very difficult, and I'm very disappointed that Director Wray decided to resign. I think Director Wray has carried out his responsibilities with integrity, professionalism during very difficult and challenging times over the last 7 years, and he was appointed to a 10-year term, and he accepted a 10-year term. And right now, his decision to leave tends to legitimize what Donald Trump is doing in terms of appointing someone else. I don't think it would be any problem if he stayed in place and had Donald Trump remove him. I mean, that certainly is a president's prerogative, even though there is a 10-year term on the FBI director role. But by doing this, I do think it's going to leave the men and women of the FBI sort of wondering what their future is going to look like, particularly if somebody like Kash Patel, a real sycophant of Donald Trump, is actually going to get through the confirmation process. So although I respect Director Wray, and I'm sure that his decision was based on how he evaluated the impact on the Bureau and the workforce, I just think that was a decision that should not have been made at this point, and he should have stayed through the transition to the new administration.
Frank Figliuzzi, any viewer of this program knows I spend a lot of time with Tim Snyder, really trying to understand a country's lurch toward autocracy. It's not a light switch. It happens slowly. And one of the most haunting things he writes about is obeying in advance. And I don't know that I've seen, in terms of the facts as they've been reported to me so far, I don't know that I've seen a more crystallized example of that than someone atop an agency whose workforce, whose rank and file workforce is under constant menacing threat and disdain from an incoming president and his most prominent public and vocal supporters. To leave in advance of that confrontation, even if Chris Wray viewed his firing as imminent, why not stay as a show of support for your workforce, which is clearly in the crosshairs of the incoming president?
Why not? Indeed. I share John Brennan's discouragement here, and I've previously said publicly that I hope that Wray stays until he has to be fired, until Trump has to fire him. I would be proud to be fired by Donald Trump, and I think the men and women of the FBI probably expected that to happen in that way. But while we can't get inside Chris Wray's head, I think this resignation or announcement of the resignation tells us more about Donald Trump than about Chris Wray. I think, it gives us a look into the future here, because we've got an FBI director who felt compelled to resign before the end of his 10-year term because a president-elect and a nominee for FBI director are saying they want to turn the FBI into some kind of secret police agency that pursues political enemies for the president. The nominee for Attorney General has used the exact same language as well. And I think when we look at why there's dismay with Chris Wray regarding from Donald Trump, we've got to look at this house of cards that everything's based on. You had the audacity to begin this segment by injecting facts into a perfectly good conspiracy theory, which is that somehow the FBI, quote, raided Mar-a-Lago, did it without a judge's approval, did it without the processes in place. They did not. In fact, ironically, this thing that upsets Donald Trump so much, Chris Wray actually made a deliberate choice to stay out of the mechanisms of the deliberations over this. You'll recall when the Washington Post reported that there was this loud, tough meeting between DOJ executives and Washington field office executives at the FBI over whether to search Mar-a-Lago or not. Chris Wray responded, I wasn't there at that meeting. I stayed out of that meeting. I wasn't aware that happened. That's on purpose. That's on purpose. He's not getting in the weeds he just allows the process to take place as if it were just you or me that were storing documents at our home. So the other criminal sin in Trump's mind was when Chris Wray went to Capitol Hill and said emphatically what happened on January 6th was domestic terrorism. Those two things, I think, is what has caused Donald Trump to say, I'm inserting a guy who doesn't give a damn about the Constitution or the rule of law.